in scenarios like this, you want to be the type of person who can look back and say that you didn't sit around, or you didn't not do anything. You have this unbelievable pressure on yourself later to have the ability to have said you tried to do something. Even if you failed, it's better probably to fail at doing something than to not have tried anything at all.
Here we are at the airport, getting ready to rock. Dr. Sanders, ready for the sun. Dr. Elfar, ready for the snow, with his hat and our gear.
45 minutes after we got to the hospital, I was already in the OR doing a case. So we just kind of basically got there. They, showed us where we were going to be sleeping on the roof, changed into scrubs, went down to the OR, and then the orthopedic surgeon who had been there for a while showed us around the ORs, and then we just started doing some cases.
They had cases ready to go. We had We had a good anesthesiologist and a CRNA with us, so their services were really needed when we got down there. So we came, pitched in, began learning the systems. The hospital was reasonably well equipped for orthopedic supplies. Sterilization was a challenge. They had a couple of little sterilizers that we had to learn how to use. And unlike typical surgeons around here, we had nobody to help us set up the rooms. We ended up doing a lot of that ourselves, and we ended up being the transport and things for patients also. So it was a full service opportunity for us to learn how to do some of these different things.
When we got to the hospital, we found that there was a makeshift operating room, and then there were other rooms that were used to do cases. And there was hardware, there was donated hardware, good hardware from the United States, clamps and scissors and needle drivers and, all kinds of great little equipment, in one big mountain, on a table with sharp ends sticking up. And there was nobody to do materials processing. And so, Jon Gabel and I do materials processing. We pick apart the scissors and we put them in a scissor pile and a forceps. And I think that's what I kind of came to realize, that if there's nobody who's going to do that, then there's no surgery that's going to get done, and there's no good that's going to get done, and there's just going to be waiting around for somebody to hold your hand, and that doesn't work.
Crush injuries, by and large. There were lots of open fractures, people who had had amputations and needed to have things cleaned out. But there were open fractures of the arms, of the legs. There were a lot of pelvic fractures. We saw a few spinal fractures down there, which were, obviously, we were there about 2 weeks out. So these were becoming older injuries by the time that we got there. Many of them had already been stabilized. A lot of them just needed to go back for repeat clean-outs. They needed some form of coverage and skin grafts, and there was a plastic surgery team that was down there that was working on that part of it too.
One morning, there was a Swedish team there, and the Swedish team had a young pediatrician with them, and he came to find me because there was a child out in the triage area who was unresponsive. We weren't sure whether he had meningitis or what was going on with him. According to the family, he had, fainted at home at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning when we saw him, and he was, having trouble breathing, and he was cold, and his oxygen levels were about 85%. So we took him back. We had a small ICU back by the operating room, so we took him back there, and we were breathing for him and giving him oxygen, and then his heart rate started to drop down to the 50s. So we were trying to get an IV in him, but we couldn't, so we put an intraosseous line in, gave him some IV fluids and epinephrine through that. Then one of the other anesthesiologists from the Texas group intubated him. I put a central line in him, and he was shipped out almost immediately right after that because we had no way to ventilate or take care of a patient like that.
The hospital census initially was somewhere around 400, and and then when we were there, people were crammed out in the hallways and in every nook and cranny that you could get. By the time that we left, the census was the lowest it had been, and it was down to about 76. A lot of people had lost their entire family. There were others who had lost a number of members of their families. When we first got there, the patients had no food unless the family members were bringing it to them. After we'd been there a few days, the UN started bringing in some food for them. So the families were very, very important for it. They would stay by the patient, sleep on the floor next to the patient. There was usually some cardboard boxes and things that they could sleep on.
We were among a group of people that the administrative group in the hospital used to call the roof dwellers. We were living on the roof of the hospital in tents that everybody who came down there would bring their own bedding and then leave it to get out of the. So there was like an unbelievable amount of like covers and like sleeping bags around, and there were cots. The military brought in some cots, and so we were living in tents.
Oh, our tent kind of, the poles. It was very, very windy one night, and then it was very windy during the day, I guess. We weren't really upstairs during the day on the roof very much, but I had gone up to get something or to bring somebody up to show them where they were going to sleep or something, and our tent had collapsed, and one of the poles was broken, and I tried to fix it, but it didn't work, so I had to have Dr. Sanders fix it later the next day. And at one point, we delivered. There were a few babies being delivered, and we had some C-sections, and at one point we had an elderly woman who was dying, and one of the other doctors went out to see how she was doing, and then, the parents are holding the newborn baby, like, right next, like, 5 feet away from the woman who's dying, and it's just like, one leaving and one, one just coming in.
I think you take a lot more from them than they may get from you when you go down to a place like that. I think that's something that you don't always realize going in.
The challenge is going to be that many of them are going to have ongoing issues for a long time. A lot of them, when they were ready to go home, there's no home. Their homes had been destroyed. They'd lost family members. They had nobody to go back to. So that's a big challenge for many of them. It's going to be malnutrition as a major issue, particularly as they're trying to heal wounds. They need to have coverage of these areas. A lot of people have lost limbs and are going to have significant disabilities from those. Trying to find artificial legs, arms, wheelchairs for people in areas where they're pretty hard to use and very expensive for them is going to be very hard. I suspect there's going to be a lot of fractures which do not heal or heal in a bad position. A lot of chronic infections which are going to be ongoing. All of these are going to be major issues for these people going forward, and the numbers are just overwhelming.
We went to another hospital whose name I forget. It was a private hospital in the center of Haiti, and in order to get there, they drove us through the center of town, which is horribly destroyed, and there's people who are now trying to salvage metal out of those buildings so that they can make ends meet. And there's little children that are hammering out nails and staples from buildings so that they can go and sell metal.
It was a pleasure to have each and every one of them. Dawn Sweeney is a superb anesthesiologist, very dedicated, and she saved the lives of a number of people down there. Jon Gabel was the orthopedic resident. He worked his tail off with never a word of complaint or groaning. He did whatever was required and did the job superbly. Johnny's wonderful. He adds a lot of color to the whole situation, and we were really glad that he was there with us too. It was a privilege to be able to go. We helped some. There's lots of people who are continuing to help, and all of the good-hearted people, both the Haitians as well as all the foreigners. And it's what's necessary right now.